Start by removing the battery. Then remove the rear chain guide. Remove tension from the chain system and derail the chain from the rear driving cog. Rotate the chain in circulation until you find the quick link in the chain. Use the chain breakers to break the quick link, thereby separating the chain. Make sure you keep the quick links, then it doesn't get lost. Cycle the chain through the system and remove it completely. Then remove the left non-drive side crank arm bolt using a 10mm X-wrench. Then use the crank arm puller to remove the crank arm itself. The outer thread threads into the crank arm itself, and then the inner thread drives onto the spindle to remove the crank arm. Remove the spacers for the bottom bracket. Use a 3mm X-wrench to remove the pinch bolt on the retaining collar. The retaining collar will then unthread from the spindle, freeing up the spindle for removal. Lightly tap on the spindle with a rubber mallet to remove completely. Use the 16-notch bottom bracket tool to undo the bottom bracket cup on the non-drive side. You can remove it completely. Bracket. Then remove the motor drive chain cover in order to remove the bottom bracket chainring assembly completely. Use a hex wrench to relieve some load from the spring load mechanism. Wiggle on the chainring until it is removed from the bottom bracket. Move the torque sensor wire from the thin slot round all the way to the circular hole where the cable can be completely removed. Pull on the cable to remove from the plug. Make sure to keep the silver shim on the drive side behind the sprockets. After removing the chain wheel, which contains the freewheel, chain rings, chain guide, as well as the torque sensor inside, it can be placed separately on a table. In order to remove the chain guide tensioning mechanism, there are 3 screws located in the back that can be removed with the 2.5mm X-wrench. Undo and remove these 3 screws. After removal, the chain guide tensioning mechanism can be removed by placing the chain guide over the chainring itself and popping the cylindrical piece over the BB tube. The chain tensioner can be replaced individually by 2 screws on the bike itself. If this part fails, there's 2 screws in the back that can be undone and the tensioner itself can be replaced if only this part is damaged. If the full unit is damaged, it can also just be replaced by the 3 screws and the complete unit can be replaced. Reinstall the new tensioner with Loctite and make sure that the screws are torqued to the correct torque spec. To reinstall the chain guide tensioning mechanism back onto the freewheel, If you have the opportunity where the freewheel is disassembled from the bike, use this opportunity to make sure that all the remaining screws in the back of the freewheel are tightened. These screws are vitally important for the operation of the freewheel itself. Our suggestion is to undo each screw, add Loctite, and reassemble them. This will make sure that the freewheel will remain problem-free throughout its life. To reinstall the chain guide tensioner mechanism, add glue to all the screw holes, install the tensioner. The tensioner can only be fitted into one way, so there's no incorrect way of installing it. The 3 screw positions can only line up in one orientation. To reinstall the sprockets and freewheel, you'll have to connect the torque sensor first. Connect the torque sensor wire, feed it back into the circular hole, and fish the wire around the hook where it can feed into the motor at a better angle once the unit is fully installed. Feed the wire in as you put the chainring closer to the bike. Remember to add the silver shim behind the chainring. Add the golden motor drive chain. First, make sure the chain aligns with the largest sprocket. Then align it with the smallest sprocket. You can use a tool to de-stress the tensioner to make sure it's much easier to install the torque sensor and chain wheel itself. After the chain wheel is partially installed, make sure that the wire is fed into the correct location as you install the chain wheel. The correct placement of this wire is vital that it is not damaged during the use of the bike. You can reinstall the BB cup with the 7mm spacer attached. Make sure the tensioner and chain guide is in the correct position. You will feel it locate on a flat spot between the chain guide and the plate. Afterwards, use a 16-notch bottom bracket tool to tighten the correct torque. Reinstall the spindle. Add the retaining collar. Tighten by hand only. Do not over-tighten the preload collar, as it will over-tension the spindle into the bottom bracket and decrease bearing life. After the collar is tightened by hand, use a 3mm hex wrench to fully tighten the collar to the spindle, making sure it's pitched. Add the spindle spacers previously removed and reinstall the crank arm. To make sure the crank arm is correctly installed, make sure it pushes up against the spindle spacers until the crank fully bottoms out. Reinstall the chain cover. Reinstall the battery. Reinstall the chain. Before adding the chain on the rear sprocket, let it hang just right of the sprocket. Feed it through the chain guide first. You will notice there's a narrow wide profile on the chain. Make sure the chain meshes on the chainring first properly. Then continue feeding it through the system. There are different ways of installing the chain. Each method works better for individuals. You can try your own method or follow the method I'm using at the moment. After feeding the chain through the bike system, you can reconnect the quick link. Make sure it pops back into place using the chain breakers. De-stress the tensioner and add it back onto the rear driving cog. Add Loctite on the derailleur hanger threads and reinstall the rear chain guide.